You really think you can control them? Edward Hawthorne's voice echoed through the grand marble hallway, but his words didn't seem to reach Maya Williams. She stood with her back straight, staring at the two twin boys who had just thrown their breakfast across the room. The rich aroma of scrambled eggs mixed with the sharp smell of orange juice, now soaking the expensive rug beneath her feet. It wasn't her first day in this luxurious mansion, but it felt like she was being tested by the wildness in their eyes, by the chaos that swirled around these walls. The other nannies had failed, all of them. They'd quit, citing the twins as impossible, uncontrollable. Edward had warned her they were difficult, but Maya wasn't intimidated. She didn't need to say much. The twins, Eli and Ethan, stared at her, their faces twisted with mischief. Ethan, the older of the two by mere minutes, threw a tantrum as he kicked his chair across the floor, sending it crashing into a wall. His twin followed, laughing maniacally. You think you're going to fix them? Edward repeated, stepping forward with a scoff, his tailored suit gleaming in the light of the chandelier. I've had the best. Therapists, doctors, you name it. They're too much. Maya didn't flinch. She simply bent down, her eyes soft but steady, as she picked up the chair and set it back where it belonged. She didn't need to speak, didn't need to justify her presence. Her hands, calloused and steady, moved with a purpose. She had been in worse situations. Far worse. The twins quieted for a moment, their wild energy focused on this stranger in their midst. Maya wasn't afraid of them. She had been a caretaker her whole life, from cleaning floors to caring for children who had no one else to turn to. And she knew something the others didn't. Every child, no matter how chaotic, had a reason for their behavior. Maya straightened up and met the boy's eyes. What's your name? She asked, her voice soft, yet firm. Ethan blinked, confused, and glanced at his twin. I'm Maya. I'm here to help, she continued. The words weren't magic. They weren't a promise of instant change. But she believed in one thing, connection. I'm going to help you both, she said, almost like a vow, even though the odds seemed impossible. Edward scoffed, shaking his head. I've seen this act before. You'll be gone by next week, just like the others. But Maya stood her ground. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Instead, she bent down to their level, offering a gentle smile. Eli tugged at her sleeve, his face softening just a little. Ethan paused too, his brow furrowing as if something inside him was waking up. Come on, you two. Let's clean this up, Maya said quietly. The twins exchanged a glance. For the first time, they didn't look at her with disdain or fear. There was something in her calm, steady presence that made them pause. Edward stood there, arms crossed, still skeptical. But something about Maya's quiet strength seemed to shift the air in the room. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't backing down. And for some reason, the boys noticed. Something inside them stirred, just a flicker, just enough to give her a chance. Maya didn't have to be loud or forceful. She didn't need to prove anything. She simply had to be present. And the chaos that had ruled this house, the wild energy that had torn through every attempt at order, began to settle. Just a little. Enough to start. Enough to begin something she couldn't quite put into words yet. But she knew this. She wasn't going anywhere. I told you. Edward muttered, his voice tight with frustration, as he watched Maya carefully pick up the scattered pieces of broken glass from the table. None of them last. They all give up when they see how they behave. Maya didn't answer him. She just kept working, her movements steady and measured, not rushing, not flinching. The twins, who had caused the mess, were watching her closely now. Their earlier defiance seemed to have faded, replaced by something uncertain, curiosity perhaps, or just the slightest hint of respect. Maya had been here for 3 days now, and every moment felt like a test. Edward Hawthorne had built an empire on control, on strength, on getting things done his way. He didn't believe in second chances. Yet here he was, watching as his children, whom no one had ever been able to calm, quietly observed a woman they had once dismissed. Maya glanced at the boys briefly, catching Eli's eye as he sat on the couch, his hands tightly clutching a stuffed bear. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a silence that seemed different from before. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't filled with chaos or rage. It was simply quiet. Edward watched Maya's every move, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had seen people like her come and go. They all thought they could change his children. his perfect, untouchable children. But the twins weren't just misbehaved, they were damaged. The world had been cruel to them in ways Maya couldn't even begin to understand. His wife, exhausted by the constant struggle, had long since given up on making things better. So had he. His only focus had been keeping his name spotless, his business thriving, and everything else, everything personal, had become secondary. But Maya was different. Her calmness, the quiet authority she exuded without even trying, was unlike anything he had seen before. And for the first time in years, he felt a slight flicker of hope. That morning, after another night of listening to the boys scream themselves to sleep, Edward had almost given up. The nanny before Maya had lasted just 3 days. The one before her lasted even less. But Maya hadn't left. She hadn't raised her voice or given in. She simply kept coming back, day after day, showing up when others would have walked away. It made him uneasy. His children, his prized possessions, were no longer just unruly. They were being tamed, slowly, steadily, in a way that no one had ever managed. Edward didn't like it. He didn't like that this woman, who came from nothing, had been able to do what all his money, all his power, could never accomplish. She had gotten through to them. "You really think they'll change?" he asked, his voice lower this time, more subdued. Maya didn't look at him. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I believe in them." She wiped her hands on her apron, then turned to face him, her eyes steady and sure. "I'm here to help, Mr. Hawthorne, and I will keep showing up, every day, no matter how long it takes." Edward didn't know what to say to that. His chest tightened as he felt the weight of her words sink in. He had expected her to break, expected her to quit just like all the others. But she hadn't. She had stuck it out, showing the same patience and determination she had shown. When she first arrived, he wanted to argue with her, to remind her of how impossible the task was, but he couldn't. There was something about Maya's presence, something that made him question everything he had believed about his family and his life. That evening, after the twins had gone to bed, early for once, and without a fight, Edward sat alone in his office, staring out the window. The city was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about business. He wasn't thinking about meetings, deadlines, or deals. He was thinking about Maya, thinking about how, despite his best efforts to push her away, she had stayed. The thought of it unsettled him. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to make him question his methods. She wasn't supposed to make him wonder if maybe he had been wrong all along. I had to admit, there was something different about Maya. As the days went by, her presence began to change the atmosphere in the Hawthorne mansion. Edward had never expected the shift to come so slowly, yet so profoundly. The twins, who had once been like tornadoes, tearing through every room they entered, were now quieter. There were still moments of frustration, still moments where they tested boundaries, but Maya had an undeniable way of handling them. The first few nights had been the hardest. The twins would throw tantrums, refuse to go to bed, and scream out in ways that made Edward's patience run thin. But Maya, with the quietest of voices, would simply sit beside them, her hand resting gently on their shoulders, speaking to them in a way that was soothing, yet firm. "I know you're scared," she would say, "but you can't control everything. It's okay to be scared, but we'll get through this together." It wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't an overnight change. But there was progress. By the end of the second week, Maya had managed to get both boys to sleep before midnight. The peace that followed was almost surreal. Edward had been skeptical at first. He had seen plenty of people try and fail, seen so many nannies who gave up after a few days, claiming the children were too much. But Maya hadn't given up. In fact, she wasn't even close to quitting. She had something in her that none of the others had, a calm, a steadiness that seemed to anchor the twins. The transformation wasn't just with the children. Edward found himself observing her more closely than he ever had before. The way she moved around the house, the way she interacted with the staff, the way she carried herself. There was an undeniable strength in her quiet composure. It made him uncomfortable, but it also made him admire her. The more he watched her, the more he realized how wrong he had been. He had written her off as just another person coming into his life to fix things. But she wasn't trying to fix anything. She wasn't trying to be a savior. She was simply showing up, day after day, and doing her best. He had always thought that success came from control, from having everything in its right place. But Maya was showing him a different way, a way where connection, patience, and understanding were the real forces that could change everything. It was subtle at first, the way he began to notice the small things. The way she spoke to the twins. The way she dealt with the staff with a kindness he didn't see in himself. Maya's quiet strength began to rub off on him, whether he wanted it to or not. One afternoon, as he sat in his office, he heard laughter from upstairs. It was Ethan, laughing, a sound Edward hadn't heard in a long time. He paused, his pen still in hand. He had been so focused on his work, on the million little things that needed his attention, that he had forgotten what it felt like to hear his children laugh. Maya had done this. She had unlocked something in them, something he had given up on years ago. For the first time in months, he felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of pride he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. The house wasn't just filled with the noise of his business anymore. It was filled with the sound of children growing, learning, and laughing. Edward set down his pen and walked toward the stairs. He wasn't sure why. He just knew he had to see it for himself. When he reached the top, he paused in the hallway, just out of sight. He saw Maya sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, with the twins curled up beside her. They were talking, their voices soft, but the smiles on their faces were impossible to miss. It was then that Edward realized he had underestimated her. Maya wasn't just changing his children's lives. She was changing his too. I had never seen the twins like this before. Maya had done what no one thought was possible. She had managed to calm their storm, and for the first time, Edward wasn't sure whether he should be relieved or uncomfortable. The house, which had been filled with tension and chaos for so long, now felt strangely quiet. The laughter of the twins echoed in the hallways, but this time it was different. This time, it was genuine. Edward stood by the door to the living room, watching them from a distance. Maya was sitting cross-legged on the floor, reading a book to the twins. They were hanging on her every word, their faces soft and engaged, a look he hadn't seen in months, maybe years. For a moment, he couldn't help but wonder how this had happened. When had the change come? When had his children, his wild, uncontrollable children, started listening to her? Maya looked up and met his gaze, her eyes steady. She didn't smile, didn't offer any kind of victory look. She simply continued reading, her voice soft, carrying across the room. Edward took a step back, his mind racing. What was happening? He had thought he knew how to handle things. He had built a life of control, of power. But Maya was doing something entirely different. She wasn't forcing anything. She wasn't trying to control the situation. She was simply there, day in and day out, doing what she could, offering what she had. It was working, and for the first time in a long while, Edward felt the stirrings of doubt. Was this the way forward? Was it possible that all his power, all his wealth, had kept him from seeing something so simple, so human? The next day, Maya and the twins were outside, sitting on the lawn, drawing pictures with chalk. Edward watched from the window, his arms crossed. The sight was odd, strange even. His children, so used to being inside, so isolated in their own world, were now engaging with the world around them, not with tantrums or defiance, but with curiosity and joy. Maya was drawing with them, her hand moving, slowly as she guided them. She was patient, yet firm. She was the kind of person who could balance both, compassion and structure. Edward didn't know why, but that made him feel something. A tightness in his chest that he couldn't explain. He had spent years building his empire, focusing on the business, on keeping everything running smoothly. But his personal life? His relationship with his children? He had neglected that. And now, Maya, this woman, who came from a completely different world, from a life he couldn't even imagine, was doing something he never could. She was connecting with his children in a way he hadn't. The more he watched, the more he realized how wrong he had been. He had been too focused on what he thought was important, status, control, success. But Maya had shown him that there was something more, something beyond power and money, connection. The twins ran toward him, their faces beaming. They stopped in front of him, their chalk-streaked hands holding up their drawings proudly. "Look, Daddy," Ethan said, his voice full of excitement. Edward blinked, surprised. They were showing him their work, something he had never expected. "It's a house," Eli added, pointing to a crayon-colored sketch of a large building with windows and a door. Edward couldn't remember the last time they had shared something with him. He looked at the picture, then back at them. For the first time in a long time, he saw them for who they really were. Not just children who needed to be controlled, but children who needed to be seen. "That's very nice," Edward said, his voice softening. Ethan grinned. "Maya showed us how to do it. She's cool." Edward's heart skipped a beat. Maya, the woman who had come into their lives so quietly, so unobtrusively, was now the person who had made this all happen. He looked over at her, standing a few feet away, watching with a gentle smile. There was a quiet strength in her, something that made her stand out in a way he couldn't quite explain. And for the first time, Edward realized that Maya had not only transformed the twins' lives, she had transformed his too. "I never expected this." As I stood in the doorway of the family room, watching Maya talk to the twins, something inside me shifted. The kids, who used to run wild with no regard for anyone else, were now engaged, truly engaged. They were listening to her, following her lead without a hint of resistance. I had seen the change happen, slowly, over the course of the last few weeks, but watching it in action was different. It was real. Maya had done something none of us had been able to do. She had made them feel seen. I had always believed that control was the answer. That if you were firm enough, if you were powerful enough, you could make people do what you wanted. But Maya didn't control. She connected. And that made all the difference. "Can you draw this with me too?" Eli asked, holding up a piece of paper with a rough sketch of a tree. I blinked. My son had never asked for anyone to draw with him before. He had always preferred to keep to himself. Maya sat down next to him, taking the crayon he handed her, and without a word, started drawing beside him. She didn't force him to talk, didn't demand anything from him. She just sat there, quietly drawing, letting him find his own rhythm. Ethan, watching them both, took his own paper and began sketching something completely different, but no less focused. The room was filled with an unexpected peace. Edward, who had been watching from the hallway, took a deep breath. For the first time, he felt like he was truly seeing his children, not just as a challenge, but as individuals with their own needs, their own desires. He had always been so consumed with work, so focused on building his empire, that he had neglected the simple act of being there for them. But Maya had done what he hadn't been able to do. She had taught the twins how to open up, how to trust again. And through that, she had shown him something he never knew he needed. That being a father wasn't about controlling everything. It was about being present. It was about showing up when it mattered, even when it was difficult. Edward glanced at Maya, who was still drawing with the boys. She wasn't looking for recognition. She wasn't expecting anything in return. She was simply doing her best, quietly, without any fanfare. It made him feel something deep inside, a mixture of gratitude and awe. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as just another caretaker at first, just another employee in his vast empire. But she had proved him wrong. She had shown him that there was more to life than power and wealth. There was love, there was patience, and there was understanding. He didn't know how to say it, didn't know if he ever could, but he needed to thank her. And not just for what she had done for the twins, but for what she had done for him, for opening his eyes to a new way of living, a new way of being a father. That evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Edward found himself standing outside Maya's room, his heart pounding. He had never been good at expressing his emotions, especially not with someone who had so much power over his life now. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let this go. He knocked softly on her door. Maya opened it almost immediately, her eyes kind, yet curious. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice warm. Edward swallowed, suddenly aware of how awkward he felt. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything you've done. For them. And for me." Maya smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm just doing my job." But Edward could hear the sincerity in her voice. And for the first time in years, he felt a real connection, not just with his children, but with the woman who had come into their lives and changed everything. Edward woke up early the next morning, earlier than usual, and walked into the kitchen, still tired but unable to sleep. He found Maya there, preparing breakfast for the twins. She was quietly working, her hands moving with purpose as she flipped pancakes onto a plate, the smell of fresh coffee filling the room. Edward couldn't help but watch her for a moment. She wasn't just a caretaker anymore. She had become something more. She had become the center of their home, the one who had managed to bring peace into a place that had always felt like a battleground. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Maya turned, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne. Sleep well?" "Not really," he admitted, rubbing his face with his hand. "Too much on my mind." Maya nodded, as if understanding without him needing to explain. "It's been a lot for all of us," she said, her voice calm and steady. Edward watched as she set the pancakes down on the table, then turned to pour some juice for the boys. There was a quiet confidence in her, something that had grown over the past few weeks. She had never asked for recognition, never asked for anything other than to do her job. But somehow, she had become the most important person in this house. As he sat at the table, waiting for the twins, Edward couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. The twins, who used to scream and fight every day, were now calmer. They had started listening, started trusting, and for the first time, Edward wasn't feeling like he was losing control. He was feeling like he was gaining something far more important: connection. The twins came running into the kitchen, their faces bright with excitement. They went straight to Maya, showing her what they had drawn the night before. They didn't go to Edward first, didn't ask for his approval. They were showing Maya. She smiled warmly, looking at their drawings with genuine interest. "These are amazing," she said, her voice full of praise. The twins grinned, their pride shining through. Edward watched them with a mix of surprise and wonder. He had never seen them so happy, so open. They had always been his children, but now they were beginning to find a new place in his life, a place where they weren't just his responsibility, but where they were becoming their own people. "They really like you," Edward said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Maya didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, her eyes steady, almost searching. "It's not me," she said finally, her voice low but certain. "It's them. They just needed someone to show them they weren't alone. They needed someone to care, without any expectations." Edward was silent for a moment, processing her words. "I don't know how you did it," he said, his voice soft, almost in awe. "But thank you. I don't think I've ever seen them like this." Maya smiled, but there was a certain sadness in her eyes that Edward couldn't quite place. "They're just kids," she said. "They deserve to have a chance, just like everyone else." And there it was, the simple truth, that he had overlooked for so long. He had been so caught up in trying to control everything, in trying to make his life perfect, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly see the people in his life. Maya had reminded him, and in doing so, she had changed everything. As the morning went on, Edward found himself thinking about the past, about how far he had come, and how much further he had to go. He knew he wasn't perfect, that he had made mistakes, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. Maybe it wasn't about control, after all. Maybe it was about understanding, about learning to listen, about letting go of the things that didn't matter. Maybe it was time to let Maya teach him how to be the father he had always wanted to be. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to truly show up for his children in a way he never had before. Edward watched as the weeks passed, the subtle changes in the house growing more and more noticeable. The twins, who had once been his greatest challenge, were thriving. They were still wild, still full of energy, but there was something different about them now. They laughed more, argued less, and most importantly, they started listening. Maya had managed to unlock something in them, something no one had been able to reach before. Edward couldn't deny it anymore. She was the one who had done this. The calmness she brought into their lives was something he hadn't known they needed, and something he hadn't known he needed either. He had been so focused on his work, so consumed by his empire, that he had neglected his family. He had neglected them in the most basic way. He had forgotten to show up. Maya had shown him that there was more to life than success and control. There was something more important: love. It had taken him a long time to admit it, but he was finally starting to understand. One evening, after dinner, Edward found himself in the living room with Maya. The twins were upstairs, tucked into bed after a long day. It had been a quiet night, a peaceful one, and he was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, they were all finally finding their rhythm. He watched Maya as she cleaned up, her movements steady, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. There was a calm in her that he had never seen before, a quiet strength that had become a steady anchor in their chaotic home. He cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "You've done something no one else has been able to do," he said, his voice low, but filled with gratitude. Maya stopped for a moment, looking up at him with those steady eyes of hers. She didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. I don't know how you do it, Edward said, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. I've spent so much of my life focusing on work, on building everything. But I've neglected the most important part of my life. My children. You've done what I couldn't. You've made me see them in a way I never did before. Maya placed the last of the dishes into the sink, then turned to face him. She gave him a small, knowing smile, as if she understood everything without him needing to explain. They just needed someone to listen, she said quietly. They needed someone to show them that they mattered, that they weren't alone. Edward felt a lump rise in his throat. It was a simple statement, but it struck him harder than he expected. For so long, he had been focused on providing for them, on giving them everything they could ever want. But he hadn't given them what they really needed: his time, his attention, his care. Maya had done more in a few weeks than he had done in years. I've been a terrible father, he admitted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Maya shook her head gently. No, you're not. You just didn't know how. And now you do. The simplicity of her words, the honesty in them, hit him hard. She wasn't trying to let him off the hook. She wasn't trying to excuse him. She was just speaking the truth. It was something he had known all along. But hearing it from her, hearing it with so much compassion, made him feel like he could actually do better. It made him feel like it wasn't too late. He stood up, suddenly feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Thank you, he said, his voice thick, with emotion, for everything. Maya smiled again, this time a little brighter. I'm just doing my job, she said. But there was something in her eyes, something soft and warm, that made Edward feel like she meant more than just the words she said. You're doing more than that, he replied. She didn't answer him, but she didn't need to. He could see it in the way she looked at him, in the way she had cared for his children when he couldn't. Maya had given them something that Edward had lost sight of, a connection. And in doing so, she had given him a second chance. A chance to be the father his children needed. A chance to be the man he wanted to be. For the first time in a long time, Edward felt hope, not just for his family, but for himself as well. Edward stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching the twins play in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the house. Maya was sitting on the porch, reading a book while keeping an eye on them. She didn't have to do anything special. She didn't have to act, to put on a show. She simply was there, present in the moment, her calm presence a constant source of stability. It was a warm day, the kind of day that invited you to take a step back and breathe. And for the first time in a long time, Edward felt himself actually doing it. Breathing. The weight that had been on his shoulders for years, the pressure of being perfect, of providing, of controlling everything, had begun to lift, and it felt good. For the first time, he realized that the real power wasn't in how much you could control, but in how much you could let go. He had spent so much of his life focusing on his business, on building something that would last. But now he understood that the most important thing, the most lasting thing, was the people you cared about. And Maya had shown him that. He had seen how she interacted with the twins, how she had this effortless way of making them feel seen, heard, and safe. He couldn't remember the last time he had done that, truly done that for them. The more he observed, the more he realized how much he had missed. His thoughts were interrupted when Maya looked up and caught his eye. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile, as if she understood everything he was feeling, everything he had been thinking. Edward felt a warmth spread through him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a sense of peace. He walked outside and joined her on the porch, sitting down next to her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, watching the twins play, the sound of their laughter filling the air. They've come a long way, Edward said finally, his voice soft but full of pride. Maya nodded, her eyes never leaving the children. They've always had it in them. They just needed someone to help them find it. I think I've finally figured that out, Edward said, looking at her. Maya turned to him, raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? That I've been trying to control everything, he said, his voice low. I've been so focused on making sure everything runs smoothly, on making sure they have everything they need, but I haven't been really there for them. Not the way they need me to be. Maya smiled again, but this time it was a little more knowing. It's a tough lesson to learn, but you're getting there, she said softly. Edward let out a long breath, his shoulders finally relaxing. I just wish I had figured it out sooner. I've missed so much. It's never too late, Maya replied, her voice steady and comforting. What matters is what you do now. Edward nodded slowly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. He had been so focused on everything that didn't matter, and now he could finally see what did. It was the connection, the moments of laughter, the times when he was truly present for his children. He had spent so much of his life building an empire, but he realized that the real treasure was in these quiet moments with his family. Thank you, he said, turning to Maya. She looked at him, her expression soft, unassuming. I'm just doing my job, she said quietly. But Edward knew it was more than that. It was more than just a job. She had changed everything for him, for his family, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. Not just in business, but in life. And it was because of Maya. He smiled at her, a genuine smile, and for the first time, he wasn't just thinking about the future. He was thinking about the now, about what mattered most. He was finally ready to be the father, the man he had always wanted to be. The days continued to pass, each one a little easier than the last. Edward noticed that the tension in the house had all but disappeared. Maya had truly transformed their home, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent acts of care. The twins were calmer now, more confident, and their laughter echoed through the halls in a way Edward had never thought possible. He had always believed that his wealth and control would be enough to ensure his family's happiness, but Maya had shown him otherwise. It wasn't about control, or even about providing the best things money could buy. It was about showing up, being there when it mattered, and making sure the people you loved felt truly seen. One afternoon, as he sat in his office working on a new project, Edward found himself distracted. The twins had just come home from school, and he could hear their voices echoing through the house. It wasn't the usual chaos. It was laughter, lighthearted and carefree. For the first time, Edward realized how much he had been missing. His mind drifted back to a few months ago, when things had been so different. Back then, he had been so caught up in his work, so obsessed with building his empire, that he had neglected the people who mattered most to him. He had neglected his children. Maya had taught him what he had failed to see for so long, that the most valuable thing he could offer his family was his time and his attention. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the house and the land. He could see the twins running around in the yard, laughing as they played a game of tag with Maya. She was right there with them, her presence steady and calm, guiding them with a gentle hand. A sense of peace settled over him. This was what mattered. Not the business meetings, not the high-powered deals. This was what life was about. He watched for a few more moments, his heart swelling with pride. The twins had changed, yes, but so had he. He was no longer the man who defined himself by his success, by his wealth. He was a father, and he had learned the most important lesson of all, to be present, to truly be there for the people he loved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Edward made a promise to himself. He would never again take this for granted. He would always be there for his children, for his family, and he would make sure they knew, every day, that they mattered, that they were the most important thing in his life. With a smile, he turned away from the window and headed toward the back door. As he stepped outside, the laughter of his children grew louder, and for the first time, Edward didn't feel like an outsider in his own life. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.